Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10, and starting from now you also get entered into the Guilds of Ravnica booster box giveaway, which runs until October 5th. Hello and welcome to another episode of Friendly Friday, a weekly series where we take a look at budget-friendly standard or modern decks, and this week we're taking a look at Monowhite Knights in Modern, an aggressive tribal deck with a lot of Knight synergies. So let's dive right into it here, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have 4 copies of Dauntless Bodyguard, 1 mana for a 2/1 human knight, and when Dauntless Bodyguard enters the battlefield, we can choose another creature we control, and at any point we can sacrifice a bodyguard to make the chosen creature gain indestructible until end of turn. So in the early game the bodyguard is just a 1 mana 2/1 knight, which is fine, and in the late game it can come down and protect the best creature we have in play. Next up we have 4 copies of Path to Exile as a removal spell of choice, 1 mana to exile any creature at instant speed, and its controller can search up a basic land to put into play tapped, and we also have a little bit of synergy with Path to Exile as we'll see in a second. And then our final 1-drop is Student of Warfare, 1 mana for a 1/1 human knight with the level up mechanic, so we can pay 1 white mana to level up our Student of Warfare, which starts out as a 1/1. If we level up the student twice, it will become a 3/3 creature with first strike, and if we level it up 7 times, it will become a 4/4 creature with double strike, so the student makes for a nice mana sink in our deck, so if we've got some spare mana laying around, we can put it towards the student's education. Next up we get to our 2-drops, where we have 2 copies of Knight of Meadowgrain, double white for a 2/2 Kithkin Knight with first strike and lifelink, so scales very well with Anthem effects, as both first strike and lifelink will get significantly better. Next up we have 4 copies of Knight of the Holy Nimbus, double white for a 2/2 human rebel knight with flanking, so if a creature tries to block the knight, it will get -1/-1 until end of turn, and if Knight of the Holy Nimbus would be destroyed, we can regenerate it instead, so very sticky threat, but any opponent can pay 2 generic mana to make the knight lose the ability to regenerate until end of turn, so that's a way for the opponent to get rid of it without exiling it or giving it -2/-2 for example. Then we also have 4 copies of Knight of the White Orchid, double white for a 2/2 human knight with first strike, and when Knight of the White Orchid enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than we do, we can search our library for a Plains card and put it on the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle our library. So Knight is especially nice when we're on the draw, since then the opponent's naturally more likely to have an extra land in play, and also combines nicely with Path to Exile, since giving the opponent an extra land will also make it more likely that the Knight will fetch up an extra Plains for us. Then we get to our 3-drops, where we have 4 copies of History of Benalia, a 3 mana enchantment saga. When the history enters the battlefield and on our following turn, we get to make a 2/2 knight token with vigilance, and on the 3rd chapter all our knights get +2/+1 until end of turn, so a very powerful Anthem effect to help us close out the game. Then we also have 4 copies of Knight Exemplar, 3 mana for a 2/2 human knight with first strike that says other knights we control get +1/+1 and have indestructible, so a very powerful ability, especially if we can have 2 copies of Knight Exemplar in play, since then all our creatures will become indestructible. Then we also have 2 copies of Benalish Marshal to round out our 3-drops, triple white for a 3/3 human knight that gives other creatures we control +1/+1, so another nice Anthem effect. Then we get to our 4-drops, where we have 2 copies of Kinsbaile Cavalier, 4 mana for a 2/2 Kithkin Knight that says knight creatures we control have double strike, which also includes himself. And finally 2 copies of Valiant Knight, 4 mana for a 3/4 that says other knights we control get +1/+1, and for 5 mana we can give our knights double strike until end of turn. Then our mana base is pretty straightforward, 22 basic plains and 2 copies of Mutavault, which can turn into a 2/2 creature with all creature types, which includes Knight, so it picks up all those bonuses as well. Then taking a quick look at our sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Fragmentize to deal with artifacts and enchantments, 3 copies of Stony Silence against artifact-based decks, 2 copies of Rest in Peace as Graveyard Hate, a Journey to Nowhere as additional creature removal, Celestial Purge is also a versatile removal spell. Then we've got a Stillmoon Cavalier, which has protection from white and black, so shines against those decks. Mirran Crusader has protection from black and from green. We've got a Fiendslayer Paladin, which is very good against all the aggressive burn decks. We've got an Oblivion Ring as another versatile answer. Then we've got a Riders of Gavony, since most of our knights are also humans and can break board stalls against other creature decks, and a Gideon alive Zendikar, which shines against control decks and also makes knight tokens. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand's not exciting, but probably keepable. Definitely don't want to draw any extra lands here, but we've got an okay curve. A Flagstones of Trocare from the opponent with a Thraben Inspector. So some sort of Death and Taxes deck. Student of Warfare is not bad, given that we've got quite a few lands. And a Squadron Hawk from the opponent. Alright. Could also be a Proclamation of Rebirth type of deck. So your opponent gets 3 more Squadron Hawks. They undid their mulligan quite nicely. So we can pretty freely attack with the Knight, and I think we want to play Student plus Knight of Meadowgrain here. That way the Knight Exemplar is going to be even better next turn. Pretty aggressive chum block from the Thraben Inspector there. Cavern of Souls naming Human. And our opponent says go. Maybe planning to sacrifice a clue. Ooh, Kinsbaile Cavalier is not bad either. Might be better than Knight Exemplar here. Attack with everyone. See what happens. Looks like they got a Path to Exile for the Kinsbaile. Alright. Can always use more lands. Opponent's gonna trade Hawk for Student. There's a chance we shouldn't have attacked with a Student there to play around Path. So more Squadron Hawks that we knew about. And Mistveil Plains is also a nice combo with Squadron Hawks, since you can put extra Hawks on the bottom and search them up again. Well, we do have double Knight Exemplar potentially, so that's a nice combo. Don't think we need to path the Squadron Hawk quite yet. Alright, so our opponent's down to 13. And they sacrifice their clue. Don't know if the opponent has any sweepers in their deck, but I know some Squadron Hawk decks do. And let's see here, opponent's got 5 lands, so Knight doesn't quite fetch us up an extra land, but it's still a fine play here. Let's play an Exemplar. So now all our creatures are indestructible. Of course, they do still have access to Path to Exile, which can break that up. And it's going to be an Archangel Avacyn from the opponent, which we might as well path here. So now our opponent's taking 11 instead of being able to block our Exemplar. And now our opponent has an extra land in place, so the Knight of the White Orchid also finds us a land. A Martyr of Sands can potentially gain them some life back. And a Thraben Inspector. Alright, history is not bad. So I guess we can start by attacking with everyone. See what happens. They do still have a couple of Squadron Hawks in hand that we know about. So they're gonna sack a clue first, and then probably sack the Martyr. And they revealed Proclamation, Squadron Hawks, and Serra Ascendant. Alright, so the Proclamation could be an issue here. But we're just gonna try and apply as much pressure as possible to kind of overwhelm the opponent. So let's cast Knight, get ourselves a Plains, and play History. Alright, so we've got all our cards on the table here. It's gonna be Proclamation Hardcast, getting back 3 1-drops. That's fine. And Valiant Knight, not a bad pickup. Definitely worth playing pre-combat here. Well, we've got a giant army of knights. And next turn we can even give them double strike. So our opponent should be able to stay alive here if they've got enough white cards in hand. Reveals Path to Exile, Ascendant, Squadron Hawks. But our opponent is at 9 life, so those Serra Ascendants are pretty far away from getting the bonus. Opponent sacking a clue. So next turn with the History trigger and the double strike from Valiant Knight, we're attacking for approximately 1,000,000 damage. And our opponent scoops it up, alright. Someone in the comments can maybe figure out how much damage we would have been able to deal there. So against the Proclamation of Rebirth deck, I think we want Rest in Peace to prevent all the recursion from happening. Journey, Oblivion Ring could be okay. Stillmoon Cavalier seems like a no-brainer. Don't mind Gideon. Riders of Gavony could be interesting as well. Prevent our opponent from chumping. But I also assume our opponent's going to be bringing in some sweeper effects, so we don't want to overextend if we don't have any exemplars. path is not at its best, but it's probably still fine. Knight of Meadowgrain can probably get cut. My guess is Benalish Marshal is cuttable. If we want to play around sweeper effects, it's not going to be at its best. And so do we bring in Journey or Oblivion Ring? I don't think we do. So I think I'm happy with this setup. Keep in the paths, just bring in 2 Rest in Pieces, the protection from white card, and a Gideon. Yeah, this seems okay. And with the fact our opponent is playing Path to Exile, I think we're okay with an extra 4-drop. Shouldn't mess up our curve too badly. So we're on the draw. Would be somewhat of a sketchy keep with only 1 land. But we are on the draw. We do have Rest in Peace, which is a pretty potent sideboard card, presumably. So I think we try it. And it's not like this hand needs a lot of lands. 3 lands will do it. So we could be pretty weak to an early Serra Ascendant, backed up with a Martyr of Sands, since we don't have any Path to Exiles in hand. But we should be pretty good against the grindy game with Proclamation of Rebirth. So Bodyguard just trades for Thraben Inspector, so that's not great. I think we run out Student. And then hope to top deck a land. So there's the Squadron Hawk, finds 3 other copies. Alright, land was good here, so now we can double level up Student. Don't think we have to run out to Rest in Peace right away here. So double level up seems fine, playing Knight of the Holy Nimbus is also fine. Again, we want to try and not overextend, so maybe in that case activating Student is better, but the Knight has some built-in protection, although some of the sweeper effects prevent regeneration, in which case the Knight of the Holy Nimbus of course would not come back. Depends which sweepers our opponent is playing, but presumably they have the one that prevents regeneration. I think I'm just gonna double level up the Student here. Get in for 3. Opponent's gonna chump with Squadron Hawk. And there's a Martyr of Sands. Alright, if they also have a Serra Ascendant, we could be in a bit of trouble. And the Thraben Inspector getting in there. Alright, let's get in with the Student. And then we'll decide if we want to play Holy Nimbus or maybe Rest in Peace. Since their opponent's going to reveal their hand, so we'll know what's up. Unless the opponent wants to take the damage here and wait on the Martyr activation. That's also possible. Alright, looks like our opponent's taking it. So, to Rest in Peace or to Holy Nimbus, I think we want to get the extra creature in play first. Since a single Student of Warfare is pretty weak to a Path to Exile. So our opponent's going to sack the clue, maybe try and find more white cards to gain more life with Martyr. That's their plan. Mistvale Plains. Another Thraben Inspector. Can still pretty safely attack with both creatures here, thanks to our flanking ability. A land is a good pickup, so we could play Knight Exemplar, attack with both, or we could run out History, or we could go Bodyguard Rest in Peace, so we've got a few options. So I think we don't want to play the Knight yet before our opponent reveals their hand, so we have a better idea if it's safe to commit to Knight Exemplar, or if we should go with the Rest in Peace instead. So I think we'll start by attacking. Inspector's gonna chump, and Martyr's gonna block as well. Alright, so if our opponent maybe relies on a Proclamation here, the Rest in Peace is gonna be good. So Martyr sacrificed reveals Ranger of Eos, Squadron Hawks, and an additional Martyr of Sands. So the Ranger of Eos could get a Serra Ascendant, so our opponent's actually not reliant on Proclamation with this hand. So that's good to know, so we shouldn't value our Rest in Peace too highly. Instead our opponent's probably gonna search up Serra Ascendants with the Ranger of Eos, so we should try to deal as much damage as possible. Which involves playing History here, I think. And then next turn we can play Knight Exemplar. And we didn't really miss any damage by not playing the Exemplar here, since our opponent double blocked anyway. Opponent can go Ranger into Serra Ascendant here. So they likely just get 2 Ascendants. Nope, instead Serra Ascendant and a Kami of False Hope. And they're gonna actually play the Kami here. Alright, it's fine. Extra Student. Could be that they want to sack the Kami the turn the History goes off, which would make sense. So maybe forcing the sacrifice this turn is beneficial. And the Knight also protects us a little bit from a top deck sweeper. So let's get in there. Opponent is gonna sack the Kami. So opponent can play Serra Ascendant, which will be a 6/6 with lifelink. And they can also still play a bunch of Squadron Hawks. Alright, double Serra Ascendant instead, so they must have drawn that for the turn. Alright, so a land would be nice here for the Valiant Knight, and we did draw it, so now the +2 from History and the +1 from Valiant Knight is enough to get past the Serra Ascendants, which is pretty important here. So now we can attack with everyone except for the Exemplar. That was a pretty key draw there. Opponent's gonna chump with the Inspector, and if we can get our opponent below 30, it's gonna be good. Alright, so our opponent takes a bunch of damage, down to 20, and we'll say go. And then it's probably time to drop the Rest in Peace soon here. Martyr of Sands, so our opponent still has those Squadron Hawks in hand that we know about. So opponent can potentially gain 9 life here with the Martyr of Sands. If they sack the clue and find a white card, they could potentially gain 3 more. And they're gonna run out the Squadron Hawk. Alright, they're gonna put a Squadron Hawk back into their deck so they can search it up with the Squadron Hawk, so I guess they still have 3 Squadron Hawks in hand now. But now they're unable to sack the clue, and since Martyr only gains 3 life per white card, they can only go up to 29 before lifelink. But that means that Serra Ascendants will be 1/1s by the time they try to block. Alright, Knight of the White Orchid, lets us find a land. So here we can probably afford to play a Bodyguard, targeting Knight Exemplar, and then attack with everyone, and then we can play a Rest in Peace second main. Alright, their opponent is chumping, and then sacking the Martyr. Alright, damage happens. And then we'll run out Rest in Peace, prevent any Proclamation shenanigans. And I guess we'll level up our Student one more. Don't really want to overextend, you never know what can happen. Suppose we could have played Knight of the White Orchid to have access to 5 mana for the Valiant Knight activated ability next turn, but I don't think we need to commit any more creatures to the board here. We should have enough. And our opponent scoops it up. Alright, awesome, managed to beat Monowhite Proclamation of Rebirth. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. Don't think we want to keep a one-lander though. Alright, this is a bit better. Not the most exciting hand, but probably keepable. Do we keep a land? Interesting question. It's definitely reasonable to keep the land on top, since turn 1 we can go Student, turn 2 we can go 2-drop, and then turn 3 we could go 2-drop plus 1-drop. And we can always use extra mana with the Student of Warfare abilities here, so yeah, I think keeping the third land on top is fine. Opponent with turn 1 opts off a Steam Vents, so it could be a Storm deck. So just have to be as fast as possible here. Maybe find a path to Exile at some point to interact with their mana creatures, but there's not much more we can do. And yep, there's the Electromancer. Alright, I think we're bluff attacking with the Student here. Don't think our opponent wants to lose their Electromancer, but we do want to get to 1 damage in. And when making these attacks, you always have to be convincing, so attacking right away is kind of the message. And yeah, I guess Knight of the Holy Nimbus seems fine here. The ability is more relevant than First Strike and Lifelink, I think. If our opponent plays a Baral, for example, they can block Knight of the Holy Nimbus, while they could block Meadowgrain. Alright, opponent with a Serum Visions. Next turn we probably just double level up the Student, and then play another one. So just a double Serum Visions turn for the opponent. So they don't quite have all the combo pieces already. So we got to sneak in 1 damage with the Student. Let's see if it ends up making a difference. And I should definitely point out that the level up mechanic is only at sorcery speed, so we couldn't double level up the Student if our opponent were to block with Electromancer, so it was really just a bluff there. But now we will level up the Student and attack for 5. So our opponent's down to 10. And we get to play another Student, so next turn we can double level up Student, play Knight of Meadowgrain. If if we don't find anything better. Opponent's actually going to remand our student, so pretty nice that we got to make use of our student's ability here instead of having to commit something expensive into the remand. But our opponent was just happy to cycle it, so they're just looking for more action. Manamorphose. Let's see if they manage to go off this turn. Definitely possible. This could be a Gifts Ungiven. Nope, a Ritual first. Another Ritual. And Paratic Ritual, so all the mana they possibly need. Could just be a Past in Flames as well instead of a Gifts Ungiven, who knows. Maybe they just want to cast a whole bunch of cantrips. But I'm assuming they can kill us here. So their opponent did have the Past in Flames, 5 mana in their pool. They're gonna flash back a bunch of rituals, make more red mana. They can use Manamorphose to make blue mana, and then they can potentially cast a whole bunch of cantrips out of their graveyard, and they're probably looking for a Gifts Ungiven here to kill us. But I don't think they already have it, so they're using the cantrips to try and find it. Right, it's going to be a Grape Shot. They could also remand their own Grape Shot to cast it a second time. And that might be enough for lethal, as the Storm count's already at 11. So yeah, the Storm matchup is going to be rough since we're pretty light on interaction. The best we get out of the sideboard is Rest in Peace, and that's not necessarily good enough. So yep, opponent flashes back Past in Flames and then casts a Grape Shot a second time, and that's enough to kill us. Alright, let's see what we can salvage here after sideboard. This would be a matchup where having maybe a Damping Sphere in the sideboard could help, or something like an Eidolon of Rhetoric or Rule of Law. Those are all good cards against the Storm deck. But the most important part is just having early pressure, so that's what we'll be trying to accomplish. So I like Journey to Nowhere to answer the mana creatures. Celestial Purge only answers Electromancer, so it's probably not great. Rest in Peace is good at shutting down Gifts Ungiven and Past in Flames shenanigans, even though their opponent's gonna cut down on the number of graveyard interactions after sideboard, most likely. Oblivion Ring is also an answer to the mana creatures, although it's pretty clunky at 3 mana. Could also consider Gideon, but a 4 mana threat against a Remand deck seems pretty questionable. A Knight of Meadowgrain is cuttable. And I'm guessing we can cut down on the Knight Exemplars. This is probably a matchup where Benalish Marshal is better, as it has more base power and toughness. And yeah, I think we'll try this. Would like to be on the play. And, well, we do have our sideboard card, and we can potentially use Path on our own creature to get an extra land. So not an ideal hand, we would prefer a few extra lands of course, but think we can't really say no to an opening hand with this much interaction for the matchup. Opponent could have also brought in some Lightning Bolts, they could have brought in Empty the Warrens to try and set up the Empty the Warren skill. But if we have a big enough board state, then we might be able to beat a bunch of goblins. So I think we're just playing a student here. And next turn we can consider pathing our own student if we don't draw land. More Serum Visions from the opponent. And a Sleight of Hand. Alright, let's get in there. I don't love using Path on our own student, since then we give up interaction for a mana creature, like a Brawl. But I think it's just too important that we are able to land this Rest in Peace and be able to deploy our Anthem effects here, that even though it's painful, it's probably worth to go for it, so we might as well do it now. Prevent any counterspell shenanigans. So we'll search up a Plains. So our opponent's got 3 mana. And our opponent's gonna say go, Mutavault, a good pickup. We can attack for 2. Try to play Rest in Peace. Opponent could have a Remand, but they could remand any of our 2-drops anyway, so... Alright, Rest in Peace works, that's good. So that cuts down on the number of ways our opponent can win the game. Surprised they didn't opt in response to maybe find a remand for the Rest in Peace. So it could be that they took out the remands, or they don't really care about the Rest in Peace too much. Tapped Spire Bluff from the opponent. And there's Brawl. So this seems like a good opportunity to get one of our +1/+1 effects in play. Opponent could still have a Remand with a single blue, but we're limited to casting a single spell this turn anyway, and Baral can block a 2/2 Mutavault, and we're not willing to throw away Bodyguard just to get into damage, so we might as well go for the most expensive threat here. That resolves. Let's get in for 3. We could also see a bounce spell on the Rest in Peace, and then our opponent might still be able to go off. But this is the best we can do. Alright, land is a good pickup. So we could go Knight Exemplar plus Animate Mutavault. Seems fine. I think that's better than trying to play Knight of the Holy Nimbus, since this is threatening lethal. So our opponent might have to use a removal spell or chum block with Baral. Alright, chum block with Baral, that's good. Opponent's down to 2, so might have a shot here. Opponent may be going for an Empty the Warrens, but we should be able to beat a medium-sized Empty the Warrens. And it's gonna be a bolt on the Knight Exemplar, yep. Maybe a Grape Shot, nope, a Braid on the Bodyguard, alright. And then our opponent scoops it up, alright. So that went pretty well. Opponent might be readjusting for game 3 after seeing the Rest in Peace, but I don't think we change anything. Opponent brought in a few cheap removal spells, so maybe we want to reconsider the Knight Exemplar, since if we can get 2 of those down, then their removal spells are not going to work. And then maybe we can cut a Benalish Marshal instead. Could also consider cutting the Cavalier. Maybe that's actually better, since that dies to the Bolt just as well, and maybe we just want a cheaper threat. Alright, we'll try this. Alright, how about this one? This hand's kind of weak to opposing removal spells, since we don't have a ton of pressure, but we do have a lot of answers for their mana creatures, so I think we're keeping. But this is definitely a hand where we could just lose a long game, where our opponent kills the first couple creatures we play and then gets ahead on cards with maybe pieces of the puzzle or just casting a bunch of Gifts and Givens, even without a mana creature in play. And while we could consider keeping Bodyguard to protect Exemplar, I think just getting the early pressure is more important. So play Bodyguard, say go, and then hope to draw into some more action. No turn 2 mana creature from the opponent, so we'll get in for 2. Could see an end of turn Bolt or a Braid on the Bodyguard here. We got nothing, opponent also no end of turn play. And it's gonna be 3 mana for a piece of the puzzle, so this is what I mentioned with the opponent kind of switching up their sideboard plan. So they're going for the more grindy approach. Alright, so they did not take the Bolt, they instead took double Manamorphose. So we know they've got 2 Manamorphoses in hand. And we could keep a path, but I think we're priced into playing the Exemplar here. Try and apply a little bit of pressure. And we could lose both creatures to a Grape Shot. We could also die to our opponent just playing a mana creature and going off. But I think we just have to take this opportunity to get our Exemplar down and hope for the best. Alright, another piece of the puzzle. And this time they revealed Baral, Manamorphose, Grape Shot. So they take Grape Shot, Manamorphose. So next turn for sure they get to Grape Shot all our creatures. But we do get to get an attack in for 5, and if we top deck another Exemplar, we could be doing it. Opponent also has to discard to hand size. Discards on a Braid, and we drew a Valiant Knight. I think we still play it here. Might make it more difficult for the opponent to kill all our creatures next turn. And we get to get in for 2 extra damage and threaten lethal next turn. Also possible our opponent just goes off next turn with a mana creature. But again, I think this is our best line. So our opponent's down to 8. And we'll see what happens. So opponent starts with a land. We know they have triple Manamorphose Grape Shot in hand. And they're going to start with a Ritual. Manamorphose number 1. And apparently they have different arts as well. Another Manamorphose. And there's the third Manamorphose. And Baral now. So they must have drawn into it with the last Manamorphose. And our opponent with a Past in Flames now, so they can flash everything back. So we're definitely in trouble now. And they still have that Grape Shot in hand. But still getting a game off of the Storm matchup is definitely a win in my book, since it's a pretty bad matchup. Could improve it with more sideboard cards, like I mentioned, Damping Sphere, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Rule of Law. Those are the kinds of cards you want, but as we see here, if our opponent kind of gets to take their time with pieces of the puzzle, finds a bounce spell for one of those 8 cards, or just has enough removal spells, they can still keep up. So it's definitely not an automatic win if you get one of those hate cards down. And if what you're seeing on screen is somewhat confusing to you and you don't know what's going on, I recommend checking out our Spike Sunday episode where we covered Blue-Red Storm, where you get to see the deck in action from our perspective, so you can get a better understanding of how the deck functions if you don't completely get what's going on here. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw with a pretty pricey hand here with 2 4-drops and no double white. But on the draw I think we can keep, we're pretty likely to find a Plains in time. Turn 1 Swamp. Alright, we picked up the Plains, that's good. So we can run out Knight of Meadowgrain on 2. And our opponent cycles a Monster Scarabed. Ooh, this is the Living End matchup, which is gonna be pretty rough here, being a creature deck. So this one's gonna be over pretty quick. Could even consider just playing Mutavault and trying to attack with that instead. So the Living End deck has 2 Cascade cards that cascade into Living End, one of them Violent Outburst, which is an instant, one of them Demonic Dread, which is a sorcery that also requires a target. So if we just beat down with Mutavault, then our opponent won't have a target for Demonic Dread, so they won't be able to cascade into Living End, so they won't be able to return all their cycling creatures from the graveyard. While if we play Knight of Meadowgrain, we play into the Living End game plan, although we would be applying more pressure. I think we're gonna play it slow and steady with the Mutavault here, and just hope they have Demonic Dread as their Cascade card instead of Violent Outburst. They could also play Fulminator Mage here, which would mess up our Mutavault plan. But some versions of Living End recently have started cutting Fulminator out of the main deck. But looks like our opponent's not one of those people. Well, we've got one of our 2 non-basic lands in the deck in play currently, so that's unfortunate. Alright, so we're no longer able to kind of sit on our Mutavault, so we're kind of committed to the Knight of Meadowgrain plan now, which doesn't look good since if our opponent has any of those Cascade cards, we're probably dead. Although I guess we do have 2 Path to Exiles, which can get rid of the largest creatures they get back from the graveyard. Opponent's taking 2 from Stomping Ground, that's not a good sign. They're cycling Desert Celadon and saying go. So my guess is they're keeping up Violent Outburst here, so we don't want to play Knight Exemplar before attacking. They're going to do it on upkeep instead. Nope, it's going to be a Beast Within. Alright. So we'll get in for 2. And then keep up double path. Well, now we have enough power and toughness in play where we don't need to play any more knights out of our hand. So we can wait for the opponent to cast our Living End. And then try to get back into the game with paths and then just playing a bunch of knights. And then after the opponent casts their first Living End, the second one becomes a lot more awkward. Opponent's actually just going to suspend the Living End. Alright. So that's an incentive for us to play more creatures to the board and try to kill the opponent before they get there. And History of Benalia is actually a good one, since that's a creature that makes an additional creature next turn. So even if they do find a Living End effect, we still get the Knight token next turn. Opponent's down to 12. And yeah, the Living End deck sometimes fails to find a Cascade card and has to hardcast Living End by suspending it, which is not the way you want to do it. So that's probably what we're seeing here. They could also try hardcasting their 5 and 6 drops, but we've got double path, so that's not the best plan. So land would win us the game, instead another Knight Exemplar. So had we found a land, path on Carabid and Exemplar, giving +1/+1 would have been 9 damage exactly. So do we path the Carabid just to get in 7 points? It's probably worth it. . So just hoping they don't top deck Demonic Dread or Violent Outburst. We should be able to handle everything else. Definitely a pretty bad matchup for the deck, so if we can steal a game here pre-sideboard, we're going to be pretty happy. And our opponent scoops it up, awesome. So got game 1 against Living End. And now we do get to bring in 2 Rest in Pieces. Of course, our opponent can still cascade into Living End to wrath our board, but they won't be getting back any creatures themselves. Is there anything else we want? Gideon seems good, as it doesn't die to Living End. Crusader seems good, as it can punch through a lot of the Living End creatures. Then I guess we could consider bringing in the removal spells to deal with our creatures. So Oblivion Ring can also come in. And I guess Stillmoon Cavalier could be okay. And then we just want to cut most of the expensive creatures here. So Cavalier, Valiant Knight can go. I think we still keep the Knight Exemplar, since if they do manage to Living End and it comes to a board stall, the Exemplar giving indestructible is very valuable. And I think we can probably cut the Benalish Marshals as well. I guess Student of Warfare is not the most impressive one. So how does this look like? Looks decent. History is not the best against Living End, since of course you don't get back those tokens if they're Living End a second time. But it does apply a lot of pressure, which is what we want. And then we just brought in the removal spells, even though they're not excellent against Living End. If we do have the Rest in Peace, then we probably still want access to some removal spells to finish off the hard cast 5 and 6 drops. Our opponent could have also brought in cards like Anger of the Gods, which is a 3 mana card, which still fits into the deck since our opponent's unable to play any cards with convert mana cost 1 or 2. Since if they cascade, they would cascade into those cards instead of Living End, and they always want to cascade into Living End. So that makes for a pretty interesting deck restriction. So of course we're hoping for Rest in Peace in their opening hand, and then just try to win the fairway. And it's not a Rest in Peace, but an okay hand, which I don't think we can ship back. With only 2 Rest in Pieces, we can't really reliably mulligan towards a Rest in Peace. Play a land, say go. So our best hope is, again, that our opponent just doesn't find their Cascade effect. And we manage to steal a game that way. So let's run out Holy Nimbus. And the effect from Holy Nimbus here, not too relevant, since Living End makes us sacrifice our creatures. So the regeneration's not gonna work. Opponent cycles Street Wraith. Second Street Wraith. Cycles Archfiend of Ifnir, so opponent could just untap, cast Living End, and we would be dead pretty soon. And there's a Verdant, so any of the Cascade cards will do here. But I don't think we really had a choice to run out Knight of the Holy Nimbus here. And yep, there's Demonic Dread, which does require a target. So had we not played Knight of the Holy Nimbus, there's a chance our opponent wouldn't have been able to go off if Demonic Dread was their only Cascade card. And a Stillmoon Cavalier. It's actually somewhat effective here, but if your opponent just cycles 1 card with Archfiend, the Cavalier is gonna die, so I don't know if we want to show them the Cavalier. I guess we can go Knight of Holy Nimbus into Path to Exile. Probably should have just gone Knight of the White Orchid into Path to Exile instead, but I guess we can maybe do that next turn. I suppose we may want to path right now before the opponent gets a chance to cycle with the Archfiend. Makes sense. Alright, opponent's gonna cycle a Fairy Macabre. So yeah, we kind of got punished here since we should have cast Path before playing the Knight of the Holy Nimbus to prevent the Fairy from putting counters on the Knight. But I don't actually know if we care too much, since the Knight is mostly here as a chump blocker. Alright, double Fairy, I guess that does make a difference since now our Holy Nimbus is dead. But it did require them to discard 2 fairies, and a 3 mana 2/2 flyer could have been somewhat effective here. And they could have also used it to pump their Horror of the Broken Land, so I guess we're not too sad with this exchange. So we're facing a 4/4 and 2 3/4s, and our opponent's got 4 cards in hand if they take their draw step here. So it's not impossible to come back from this, but it's going to be challenging. But at least we got to see the Living End deck in action, and then hopefully we can draw a Rest in Peace in game 3 and steal the match. Opponent cycles a Horror. to pump the one in play, and cycles a Desert Saradon, so they could be trying to go for lethal here. They've got 14 damage right now. If they have a free cycler like Street Wraith or a free discard effect like Fairy, they could technically kill us here. Looks like just 16. So we're down to 4. We would need a Path to Exile here to have a chance. Of course, now our opponent still has a ton of cards in graveyard, so if they Living End a second time, we would get back a Holy Nimbus, while they get back a whole bunch of fairies and Carabids. So now we will play Knight of the White Orchid, get a Plains, and then play the Stillmoon Cavalier. So Cavalier has protection from black, so that can jump in front of the Horror of the Broken Land, and Knight of the White Orchid can jump a Street Wraith, and we would take 3 down to 1. If our opponent has a Violent Outburst, they could also just decide not to cast the Living End off of it, and just get the +1/+0 effect, or they could just cast a Demonic Dread, prevent Knight of the White Orchid from blocking, and get in for at least 6. So this is gonna do it. Alright, so we could consider mulliganing more aggressively towards Rest in Peace. Hopefully we just have it in our opening hand, so we don't have to make that decision. I think I'm happy with how we sideboarded for the most part. So we would like to be on the play. And that's not a Rest in Peace. We do have a Celestial Purge and a Journey for interaction, but this hand seems kinda weak, especially if we don't draw lands. So seems like a okay mulligan. Alright, this one has a Mutavault, which our opponent probably sided out their Fulminator Mages. So Mutavault could deliver some beatdowns while we try and look for a Rest in Peace. So how much better is a 5-card hand gonna be? I think we give this one a try and bottom the Knights. So the plan here is gonna be turn 1 Mutavault, turn 2 attack with Mutavault. That way we blank the Demonic Dread, so only 4 of their cards. The Violent Outbursts can cascade at instant speed without needing a target. Of course, there's still a chance our opponent plays out a Fairy Macabre on 3 and targets their own creature with the Demonic Dread. But I think this is our plan for now. Ooh, second Mutavault. I guess we still want to play the Plains in case we want to play History next turn. So we'll get in for 2. But now we actually have a somewhat realistic plan with 2 Mutavaults. Opponent cycles Horror of the Broken Lands. Alright, so we could play History, or we could stick to our plan of activating Mutavault. If we could see our opponent's hand, of course, that would make our decision a lot easier. But I think we're just sticking to the Mutavault plan for now. So we don't want to play any creatures that they can target at sorcery speed. With Demonic Dread, that's our plan. So we can attack for 2 this turn, and then for 4 next turn. That does start adding up. But if they just hardcast a random 3-drop, we might have to change plan once again. And this plan is also based on the fact that our opponent presumably sided out the Fulminator Mages after seeing all those basic planes. Alright, so it could be pretty painful if our opponent has a Violent Outburst, since they would be killing both our Mutavaults here. But I think we're still going for it. At least they only would be getting back a single Horror of the Broken Lands. And we still have plenty of lands in hand, so I'm not afraid of being stuck on 2 lands here. Alright, see what happens. Well, looks like they do have the Violent Outburst. So they get back Fairy plus Horror, and we lose both Mutavaults. That's too bad, but I think this still gave us the best shot. Since I've played my fair share of Living Ends in Modern, and you don't always have the Violent Outburst. There's only 4 copies in the deck, so I have a lot of memories playing against Bogle's decks with Living End and only having Demonic Dread as my Cascade card, which of course can't target hexproof creatures. And while Bogle's is usually a good matchup for Living End since the sacrifice ignores hexproof, if Demonic Dread is your only Cascade card, you can still lose the game. Alright, so we're not out of it yet since our opponent only has those 2 creatures, and now we top decked a Path, which can answer the Horror. So the question is, do we Path the Horror, or do we play History first? My guess is we want to deal with the Horror first, so we can still play a Student, level it up once, and then keep a path. Opponent's gonna know what's up, but no reason to path right now. Opponent could also just start hard casting their Archfiends and other 5-drops, which is one of the fun aspects of Living End. Alright, let's path the Horror now. Giving the opponent extra lands is also not great, since that's gonna help them to hardcast their creatures here, but I think we needed to deal with the Horror there. Our opponent did seem pretty light on cycling creatures, since they didn't cycle anything on turn 2. And our opponent also went pretty deep into their deck when revealing cards with Cascade, so they might also have a bunch of Living Ends stuck in their hand. It's gonna be a hardcast Monstrous Scarabid from the opponent, which we could potentially block. Ooh, and a Knight of the White Orchid is perfect here. So we get to play Knights, and then level up our Student twice, and we'll have enough first striking power on defense to kill the Monstrous Scarabid. Or we could play the History. That's also an option, but then we won't be able to block the Scarabid easily. I kind of like leveling up the Student more here. Alright, so we technically can block the Scarabid. If our opponent has Demonic Dread prevent us from blocking. They could have a Beast Within that they want to use on one of our creatures, we'll see. Alright, it's going to be an Anger of the Gods instead. So that's going to deal with 2 of our creatures, leave the Scarabid in play. Alright, so if we draw land, we could double History next turn, which would be pretty effective. And we're still at 10. So again, not out of it yet. And we're suspecting our opponent has at least 1 Living End in hand. And they probably have some more Cascade effects. So their hand's probably not amazing. Maybe hardcasts Fairy here, or hardcast Spirit Guide. Yep, hardcast Spirit Guide. The good old 3 mana 2/2. Alright, Rest in Peace comes a little late here, but still worth playing. And then we get to play History. So we'll take a beating from the Scarabid this turn, but then next turn we are going to be able to double block it. So this is the fun, scrappy part of the game where Living End has happened, but the game's not over yet. So we could take 6, or we could trade for a Spirit Guide, take 4 down to 6. Next turn we'll have 2 Knight tokens at the very least. Even if they prevent us from blocking, we wouldn't be dead. So I think I like that the most. So we're down to 6. Hopefully they don't have a follow-up creature here. It's going to be a Crows and Grip on the History of Benalia. Yep, that's pretty effective here. Since now we won't get the second Knight token. Alright, so second History, can trade for Spirit Guide, we'll take 4 down to 2. If they have a Demonic Dread in hand, we can block. But again, I'm kind of suspecting they have a Living End in hand. Instead they did have a Demonic Dread. Alright. Well, that's too bad. So their Living Ends were just deep into their deck, or they just top decked the Demonic Dread, I guess. So we'll take 6 and be dead. Still pretty close game here. If one of these planes in the last couple turns were a Knight, we might have been able to survive here and turn the corner pretty quick. Alright, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.